You ever just look up at the stars and wonder what it would be like to actually go up there? Yeah, me too. But one thing that always brings me back down to earth is, well, the cost.
Oh yeah, space travel, especially for us regular folks, it's got a pretty hefty price tag.
For sure. So, for this deep dive, we're going to blast off into the financial side of space travel, from those massive government missions to the newer private space companies, and even the early days of space tourism. We dug into NASA, SpaceX, Blue Origin, you name it.
We're talking about breaking down those big, often confusing numbers so you can get a clearer picture of what it actually costs to get to space right now and what it might look like in the future for the everyday space enthusiast.
All right, let's launch into this. First off, the big dogs, NASA and those traditional government space missions. We all know sending anything, let alone people, into space, it's a seriously expensive business. I mean, billions with a B.
Oh yeah, we're talking about decades of research, complex engineering, those crazy materials that can survive the harshness of space, years of testing, and of course, making sure those astronauts are safe. Those costs add up quickly.
To give you an idea, NASA's Artemis program, their big plan to get back to the moon, that's got a budget of about $93 billion. That's just mind-boggling, isn't it?
It really is. And that covers everything. Designing and building the Orion spacecraft, the huge Space Launch System rocket, setting up everything they need for those moon missions. It's a massive long-term project, and every piece of it adds to that huge price tag.
So, say you dream of being an astronaut on the International Space Station. What's NASA looking at cost-wise to get you up there? Of course, you wouldn't be paying out of pocket, but it gives you a sense of the investment.
Well, they estimate that each astronaut on those ISS missions, it costs NASA something between $50 million and $90 million per person. To put that in perspective, that kind of money could fund a major research institution for a whole year.
Wow. So you're not cutting a check for that, but that number really shows you the massive resources and effort that go into sending even one person to space. It's incredible how complex and resource-intensive human spaceflight has always been.
It highlights the scale of these operations, and now for something completely different.
Right. Let's switch gears to a name you've probably heard a lot lately, SpaceX. They're all about making space more accessible, and their big play is cutting costs with those reusable rockets, which is pretty amazing for the future of space travel.
It's totally a game changer. Recovering and reusing those big, expensive rocket parts, especially the first stage, that's really opened up space for all those satellites and cargo missions. Think of it like airlines reusing their planes for multiple flights. It slashes the cost per trip.
So how does that actually translate into dollars? Give us an idea of how SpaceX's approach compares to those NASA numbers we just talked about.
Well, a Falcon 9 launch, their workhorse rocket, that costs around $67 million. And if you're thinking about riding on their Crew Dragon, the one that takes astronauts to the ISS, that's about $55 million per astronaut. Still a big chunk of change, but significantly less than what NASA spends, and that's the impact of their reusable technology.
Yeah, it's definitely not cheap. But comparing it to NASA's figures really shows you how their innovations are changing the game. And I know there's a lot of buzz about their Starship program that's aiming for even more drastic cost reduction, right?
Oh, absolutely. Starship is where the real potential lies. They want to make the entire system reusable, both the booster and the spaceship, and their goal is to bring the cost of a launch down to just $10 million per mission. Imagine that.
That's incredible, like the cost of a really fancy private jet today.
Exactly. If they pull that off, it could be a revolution, opening up all sorts of doors for space research, businesses, and maybe even everyday people like us.
All right, so we've covered government programs and the professional side of private space travel. But what about the rest of us, the curious folks who just dream of getting a taste of space? That's where space tourism comes in. So what options are out there right now for someone with that adventurous spirit and, a decent chunk of change?
Well, right now, for folks like you who aren't astronauts, your main options are with companies like Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic. They offer suborbital flights, so you get to experience weightlessness and see the curvature of the Earth, but you're not actually orbiting the planet.
It's more like a really, really high, really fast plane ride that skims the edge of space.
Exactly. But for those incredible views and the feeling of weightlessness, it's still pretty amazing.
For sure. But let's be real, what everyone wants to know is the price. How much damage are we talking for one of these trips?
Okay, so Blue Origin, their suborbital flight, which lasts about 10 minutes, will set you back somewhere between $250,000 and $500,000 per person.
That's a pretty wide range. What accounts for that difference?
Well, things like when you book, early bird versus last minute, the specific flight path, and any extra experiences or personalized services they might offer.
So it's a sizable investment for a short but definitely unforgettable experience.
For sure.
Now, Virgin Galactic is also in this suborbital space tourism game. What are they offering, and what's the price tag look like?
Virgin Galactic's trips, they're priced around $450,000 per passenger. Similar to Blue Origin, you get a taste of spaceflight, weightlessness, those amazing views, the whole deal.
So those are the, let's say, more accessible options, but there are also pricier, more ambitious experiences out there, like SpaceX's Polaris mission, right?
You got it. For those with deeper pockets and a thirst for adventure, SpaceX has Polaris. It's a multi-day mission in orbit around Earth, even spacewalks. But the cost for that, it's around $50 million, a whole different level.
It really shows you the range of experiences and costs in space travel today, from a quick up and down to a multi-day orbital adventure.
Yeah, true orbital spaceflight with all its complexity, that remains exclusive and expensive.
Now, we've talked about ticket prices, but I'm guessing there are other costs involved that you might not think about when planning your space trip. Like, it's not just about the ride, right?
Oh, absolutely. The ticket price, whether it's for a quick hop or a full orbital mission, it's just the beginning.
What are some of those hidden costs of going to space?
Well, for example, if you're going on a spacewalk, that spacesuit, that can cost over $12 million.
$12 million for a suit. That's more than some houses. What makes them so pricey?
It's not just a fancy outfit, it's a personal spacecraft, basically. It has to provide breathable air, regulate temperature, protect you from radiation, extreme temperatures, and even micrometeoroids. The engineering and testing involved is incredibly complex.
That makes sense. So apart from the suit, what else might you need to factor in?
Depending on the mission and who's sponsoring your flight, you might be looking at medical tests, extensive astronaut training, which can take years, even specialized insurance. These all add up.
So even if the ticket price goes down, there are still these other big hurdles to think about, especially for those longer orbital flights or spacewalks.
Exactly. Bringing down launch costs is the main focus. But these other expenses are a big part of the overall cost of going to space.
Okay, so we've talked about the current costs, which, let's face it, are astronomical. But what about the future? There's a lot of talk about space travel becoming more affordable. What's driving that?
The biggest factor is the progress we're seeing in reusable rocket technology. Companies like SpaceX are leading the way, and others, like Rocket Lab, are jumping on board. The more we can reuse those expensive rocket parts, the lower the cost per launch becomes.
Like using a digital camera instead of a disposable one.
Exactly. You get multiple uses out of that big initial investment.
We've already mentioned SpaceX's Starship and their ambitious cost targets. What other companies or technologies are contributing to this trend of making space travel more affordable?
While SpaceX gets a lot of attention, there are others making waves. Rocket Lab, for instance, is also working on making parts of their Electron rocket reusable. This kind of competition is great because it drives innovation and hopefully pushes prices down even further.
And what kind of timeline are we looking at for more affordable space tourism? I mean, prices that might actually be within reach for more people.
Some experts believe that within the next decade, we could see space tourism ticket prices drop to something between $10,000 and $50,000. That's a huge decrease from where we are now.
Still a lot of money, but it's starting to sound more like a, once-in-a-lifetime vacation kind of price.
Exactly. It would make a trip to space a more realistic, albeit still aspirational goal.
That's an exciting prospect. What needs to happen for those prices to become a reality?
We need to see continuous improvement in reusable launch systems, more frequent flights, more efficient operations to cut down on overhead, and maybe even new, more cost-effective spacecraft designs specifically for tourism. It's a combination of technology and good old-fashioned efficiency.
So, to wrap this up, it's clear that right now, space travel is incredibly expensive. Whether you're a government agency, a private company, or just someone who dreams of going to space.
We've seen the enormous budgets involved, the cost-saving innovations, and the high price tags associated with the very early days of space tourism.
But the big takeaway is that while space travel is currently a luxury, things are changing. Costs are trending downwards, and that's largely because of those amazing advancements in reusable rocket technology. There's a real possibility that space could become more accessible in the future.
It's a really exciting time, with companies pushing boundaries and potentially opening up space for more people.
So here's a question for you to think about. Considering everything we've discussed, would you personally be willing to pay for a trip to space if the price becomes more affordable? It's definitely something to ponder.
It makes you think about what that experience would be worth to you and how these new technologies could change our relationship with space travel, making it a possibility for more and more people.
Exactly. We encourage you to keep an eye on those developments in space technology and commercial spaceflight. The things we've talked about today could become reality in some pretty amazing ways. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.